The wastes of Fallout are home to some really frickin' huge things. Whether they're mutated from latent radioactive fallout or are a product of the government's Forced Evolutionary Virus experiments, the following 9 monsters are some of the biggest from the series. Today let's look at some of the largest creatures in the Fallout universe. Super Mutant Behemoths. As a product of experiments using the Forced Evolutionary Virus, Super Mutant Behemoths are some of the largest and oldest of their kind. While there's no evidence that the Mariposa FEV strain has ever produced a traditional Super Mutant Behemoth, the Huntersville, Vault 87, and Institute FEV strains seems to contain something that allows super mutants to have their maximum size uninhibited. As such, with time and I guess enough calories, some super mutants can grow to behemoth status, standing anywhere from 13 to 20 feet tall. The taller and much larger side of the super mutant behemoth spectrum is usually found around the Capital Wasteland, while the Institute and Huntersville strains tend to be the smaller, but still relatively big, behemoths. And where behemoths gain in size and strength, they lose out in intelligence. Unable to speak even the most basic of sentences, the super mutant behemoths instead communicate with their massive fire hydrant clubs. And in case it wasn't abundantly clear, they're saying that they don't like you. Frank Horrigan. Remember how I said that the Mariposa FEV strain has never produced a traditional super mutant behemoth? Well, the closest thing that has ever come to a typical behemoth is the final boss of Fallout 2. Special Agent Frank Horrigan. During a wasteland expedition, Frank came into contact with the Forced Evolutionary Virus at the Mariposa military base. In response, the Enclave sent him to Control Station Enclave for study. For 2 years, scientists performed various experiments on the mutated man. Controlled injections of modified FEV turned the mutant into a bigger, stronger, and faster version of any other super mutant. That, combined with his undying loyalty for the Enclave, made Horrigan a truly lethal threat for anyone that opposed the militant group. Frank is quite literally a huge brick of a man. No, seriously, that's how he's described in the Some People in the Wrong Place at the Wrong Time special encounter. He's also been described as a giant that probably eats people like you for breakfast. Frank Horrigan dwarfs humans, power-armored folk, and even super mutants in size. Many sources claim that he stands 12 feet tall, and while I can't find any mention of this specific height in-game, during Frank's encounter with Matthew, he is towering over the Brotherhood of Steel agent, looking to be nearly twice his size. So I'd say around 12 feet tall seems to be an accurate estimate. So while Fallout 3's super mutant behemoths are over 1.5 times taller than the Special Agent, Frank matches the height of the smaller Institute and Huntersville behemoths, making Mr. Horrigan for all intents and purposes the only confirmed Mariposa FEV behemoth. Mirelurk Queen. Lurking in the depths of any body of water or swamp is the magnificent matriarch of mutated crustaceans. The Mirelurk Queen is the second creature that Fallout 4 describes as a giant in-game, the first being the behemoth. These giant mutated deep-sea isopods pose quite the threat to any traveler unlucky enough to come across them. The Mirelurk Queen can usually be found submerged in any swampy locale like the Murkwater construction site, Northwood Ridge Quarry, or even near Vault 88's water pump in the east sector of the vault. Compared to the Institute behemoths, the Mirelurk Queen is ever so slightly taller. I'd estimate a Mirelurk Queen is about 15 feet tall. However, the Wasteland Warfare Mirelurk creature minis comes with a scale. Doing a wee bit of math, if the human model is about 35mm tall, and the Mirelurk Queen is 120mm tall, and we know that the average male height is 5'9", then that would put the Mirelurk Queen at around 20 feet tall. So really anywhere from 15 to 20 feet tall seems like a reasonable estimate for the size of these beasts. But the exact size of these guys should be the least of your concern if you find yourself unknowingly entering their nest. Giant Scorpion. The largest creature so far to make this list is likely the giant scorpion in the promotional comic One Man and a Crate of Puppets. As the Puppet Man leaves the vault for the first time, upon opening the massive vault door, he comes face to face with a giant scorpion. The red-eyed beast is in the process of crushing 2 cars between its claws. It's quite hard to estimate the size of this beast, but see that tiny silhouette in the frame? Yeah, that's Puppet Man. So if I do this super janky attempt at finding the scale, the scorpion appears to be 21 poorly cut out pixelated Puppet Mans. If the Puppet Man is of average height, then that would put the scorpion size from face to tip of stinger at 120 feet 9 inches, making the scorpion the largest creature so far. Bad news is that technically the comic is non-canon, but still, there could be some pretty massive scorpions out there. For the sake of my sanity, I surely hope not. Harold, his roots. This one might be a bit surprising at first, but give me some time to explain. Harold at first seems like nothing more than a ghoulish-looking mutant, but by 2277, the start of Fallout 3, the tree growing from his head, Bob, has taken over quite a bit. By the time the Lone Wanderer meets the duo, Harold and Bob that is, they are stuck in place at the lush settlement of Oasis. For the last 20 to 30 years or so, Bob's roots have been constantly growing underneath the soil of the area, coincidentally creating Oasis and unintentionally creating a group of worshippers called the Tree Minders. The trees and plants that grow around Oasis are from seeds that have fallen off of Harold's tree friend Bob, or as Harold calls them playfully, Herbert's seeds. So if we consider Harold's roots, in addition to the plants that come from his seeds, Harold would be quite the massive creature. But even if we were to just consider only Harold and his roots, he would still be quite the big boy. I'm not even sure how to begin to estimate Harold's size. An article on the website deepgreenpermaculture.com claims that tree roots can spread up to 5 times the radius of the tree's canopy. Harold unfortunately lacks the leaves to get a decent estimate, but if we do a bit of overlaying and pivot the plane that the Lone Wanderer is standing on so that it becomes a bird's eye view, we get the radius of Harold's branches to be about 2 Lone Wanderers. Assuming that the Lone Wanderer is of average height, 5'9", then that would put the radius of Harold at 11 feet 6 inches. Then if we just use that number, Harold's roots can spread 5 times that radius, making the radius of his roots 57 feet 6 inches. So width-wise, at his furthest extremities, Harold clocks in at 115 feet 6 inches. But how tall is he? Well, utilizing my great photo editing skills, I've come to the conclusion that from ground level he's about 5 Lone Wanderers, or 28 feet 9 inches tall. But his roots go beyond the ground level, so how can we figure out how deep they really go? Well, I'm about to make a dangerous and wildly inaccurate guess. So Harold's heart is below the ground, right? And this got me thinking, well, what if Harold, his roots, his branches, and all, shares similar proportions to a human, but in tree form? And that led me to this monstrosity. As you can see, if Harold's current anatomy is relative to that of a normal human, then it would stand to reason that 19 or so Lone Wanderers can fit between ground level to the bottom of Harold's roots, or tree toes if you will. If the math checks out, then this results in Harold having a root depth of 109 feet 3 inches. If we combine the root depth and the height, then we get a grand total of Harold being 138 feet tall. I fear that if you weren't following before, I may have lost you here. No more math from here on out, I hope. Just know that Harold is really big and likely takes up the most space of any other creature in the series. Gojira. Imagine this. A Fallout New Vegas gecko, you know, those derpy fire-breathing ones? But imagine it being the size of a super mutant behemoth. Well, that's exactly what Gojira is. And while the creature can't be found in-game, this monstrous gecko exists within the game's files and can be spawned in using console commands. In addition to his immaculate name, his stats are pretty nutty too. And by pretty nutty, I mean, be glad he's not in the game. He would easily be the strongest creature in Fallout New Vegas. For starters, Gojira has 8,000 hit points. That's over 2 times the HP of a level 50 X-42 giant robo-scorpion, 8 times a legendary Deathclaw, and 4 times a legendary Bloatfly. And while Gojira's melee attack does a measly 25 damage, its unique fire breath weapon, Gojira Flame, does 400 base damage, plus an additional 3,200 damage per second. Yeah, 3,200 damage per second. The damage per second alone is nearly 5 times that of the CZ57 Avenger's damage per second if the courier has all related perks. If you're ever wondering why an absolute monster of a monster is in the game files but not in the game, well, Josh Sawyer mentioned in a Formspring Q&A that Gojira was made by a developer simply for fun and to terrorize Camp McCarran. With all that being said, the fact that Gojira is more than 3 times the size of a normal gecko goes to show that he belongs on this list. Scorched Queen. When the Scorched Plague befell the Appalachian region, much of humanity was wiped out for a second time. Those who couldn't flee were left fighting a doomed battle, and many ultimately succumbed to the Scorch. Scorch beasts, as they were called, were the primary spreader of the disease. What were once normal, albeit irradiated bats, turned monstrous when Thomas Eckart's Enclave exposed them to several biochemical experiments. The result? A massive, terrifying winged creature that had the ability to turn entire settlements into what can essentially be described as brainless drones. The biggest of the Scorched beasts would be their queen, the first endgame boss of Fallout 76. Easily dwarfing any creature in the game, the Scorched Beast Queen is, as Ella Ames would describe, the apex predator of Appalachia. Now, it's a little hard to get exact measurements for just how big a Scorched Beast Queen is, but excuse any sort of pronunciation errors. Katya Gudkina, concept artist on Fallout 76, produced this image, with a little silhouette for scale, and if concept art isn't your vibe, here's an image of two power-armored folk next to the head of a Scorched Beast Queen. Definitely one of the biggest creatures in Fallout. Mega Sloth. These Fallout 76 creatures are big, eh? Mega, adjective, very large, huge. So this list wouldn't really be a biggest creatures list without the Mega Sloth, right? Although sloths aren't native to Appalachia, that didn't stop one millionaire's son from collecting a menagerie of the mammals before the Great War. Isaac Garahan, son of Vivian Garahan of Garahan Mining, preferred to spend his time with his pet sloths instead of with the family's business. When the bombs dropped, the sloths managed to escape the Garahan estate and subsequently mutated from latent radiation. The megasloths of Appalachia are the result, and while these peaceful creatures are the enlarged form of a regular sloth, their design is inspired by the prehistoric giant ground sloths, whose fossils were first discovered in a cave in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. So I figure if the megasloth is based on a prehistoric giant sloth, then it's likely it shares similar dimensions. The M. jeffersoni subgenus of the megalonyx sloth measured in at roughly 10 feet in length and weighed over 2,000 pounds. While not too crazy big compared to some other entries on this list, and likely the smallest on this entire list, it's a megasloth. It's in the name. Earl Williams. Continuing the trend of Fallout 76 giant creatures, next up on the list is the unique Wendigo Colossus, Earl Williams. Before the Great War, Earl was a miner working at the Monongah mine. When Hornwright Industrial bought the rights to the mine in April 2075, they replaced the workers with their auto miner Protectron units. The auto miners were so efficient that only months later, in January of 2076, the coal mines were completely exhausted. Frustrated by Hornwright's sabotage of the small town's economy, several laid-off miners, including Earl, drunkenly broke into the mine to steal supplies. While everyone was still inside, Hornwright mining supervisor Deke Sykes closed up the mine's entrance with explosives, trapping the drunken miners inside. Hornwright lied to the townsfolk, saying that the missing miners simply skipped town. Meanwhile, in the mine, Earl and the others had to struggle to survive. They had already lost one of their colleagues from the blast that sealed the mine. Stuck with no food, many other miners agreed to cannibalize their recently deceased friend. Still stuck, and barely holding out hope for survival, the trapped miners would eat the corpses of those who refused to become cannibals and that had passed away from starvation. Eventually, Earl developed a desire for human flesh and would find himself wanting to eat those who had yet to pass. When the Vault Dweller from 76 goes searching for Earl on behalf of his daughter Maggie, they encounter the mutated remains of the former Monongah miner, now a Wendigo Colossus. The Wendigo Colossus stands quite tall. From this image, we can see that they are a little taller than two power-armored folk, which is about 7 feet tall, so a little more than two of them would put Earl at around 14 to 16 feet. Also, just as an aside, the Colossus is a bit weird, right? It has like 3 heads, so how do we know which one is Earl? Is it all Earl, or is it something else? Like, if I were to have a conversation with Earl, should I look at the middle head or split my gaze between all 3 heads? I'm not entirely sure. The Master. To close off this list, I just want to give an honorable mention to the amalgamated mess of a mutant cyborg that is the first Fallout's final boss and leader of the Unity, the Master. What was once a wasteland doctor and explorer, the man formerly known as Richard Moreau nearly drowned in a vat of FEV after being hit by a robotic crane. His prolonged exposure to the virus mutated him into what we now know as the Master, and while the meaty bits of the Master take over quite a bit of the Los Angeles Vault, including the infamous Corridor of Revulsion, it's something a bit more technologically advanced that gives the Master his great size. You see, further experimentation allowed him to neurologically link himself to computers, granting him access to those systems' networks and databanks. And you might say, oh, well, virtual size doesn't count, and that's fine. That's why he's only an honorable mention. But the fact that the Master is connected to an entire vault's worth of systems and data would seem to extend his reach throughout the entire Los Angeles vault. When you step into the vault for your final confrontation, you're not just entering a vault, you're entering the Master himself. And with that image firmly cemented into your mind, I will take my leave. I know there's some other giant creatures in the Fallout universe, things like the Marigold Ant Queen and Hermit Crabs are quite large as well. Let me know if there are any others I may have missed or ones that you want me to cover in a future video. But that's all from me today, folks. Thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.
I wondered what could possibly cause all this. And then I got my answer. It swooped down from the sky, screeching, breathing, infecting everything. I don't know how to fight this. But we need to consider all our options. Even the nukes.